So I have a random observation that hopefully this makes sense to you, and it ties in with the salads, and it ties in with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it ties in
Sure.
with you as a vocalist. So bear
Nah,
with
yeah.
me with this, okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I I went back and listened to the entire Salads discography, and I had done that a few months ago when Chuck was on, who was the bass player for the Salads, and I had made an observation that to me, the first album, Meanwhile, which wasn't you singing on that one, to me, it felt very Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I compared it to, say, Mother's Milk. Okay. And then you have Fold A to B, which was like the big breakout album with hit singles, all that stuff. And to me, that felt like the Chili Peppers moving from Mother's Milk to Blood, Sex, Sugar, Magic, where Anthony Kiedis changes from the more hip hoppy one word after another kind of speaking, shouting style into he really developed his vocals. And it's like that new vocal captured a way bigger audience and propelled them with that album. And I felt like that's what you brought to that album. Does that comparison make any sense to anyone but me?
It makes more sense to me than you probably realize
Okay.
because you asked me if it if it did. Um, and to a lot of people will probably totally get that. So that first record, I wasn't even a part of Meanwhile of the Salads. I was a fan of, and I was just being introduced to the guys. And little did I know at that time, we were drawing from the same influences. We all grew up listening to the like different stuff because I'm the youngest guy in the band. They're all about 5 years older than me. So slight, still the same eras of music are influencing us, but where the beginning of one party of an era is introducing is influencing one, the end of the era is influencing the other. So while there were some differences, the core of our influences were exactly what you mentioned. It was early Chili Peppers, it was early Faith No More, it was early Fishbone, a lot of funk, hip hop, punk, metal, rock, grunge, alternative, whatever you want to call it, but heavy, funky, a bit rapping but singing stuff, groovy, rap rock, whatever, all those things mashed up together. And then where I think the Salads had a bit of difference in all that, our extra kind of influences came from the guys in the band also being heavy into glam rock and the Motley Crue, the Van Halens, the Poison, all that kind of a flashy stuff. And me, I added a bit more, I would say, reggae and punk stuff that they didn't listen to as much, and hip hop, a lot of hip hop. We all liked all the mainstream stuff, but I was a bit deeper in my love for that, which shone through, I guess, a bit with Fold A to B vocally. But you know what's funny? The vocals on the Meanwhile album were an afterthought. They did the whole record instrumentally, and then like, oh yeah, vocals. That's why they're kind of all over the place. That's why they all took turns on vocals. That's why the lyrics are kind of, I don't want
Wait,
to say
so was there
meaningless,
another
but it's
singer,
goofy.
or it was just the
They all took turns
Chuck
on
and Dave
vocals.
and everyone's? So there
Mm-hmm.
was no other singer.
Everybody took vocals. There was no lead singer before
Wow.
me. Yeah. Yeah. The rap stuff Dave is doing mostly. Our previous bass player who left the band before I joined, who was unreal on bass, was Dave Sommerfeld. He did some of the more singing stuff. I think Chuck did some of the stuff that's like this. I forget which, like
That's an
stinky,
early song on the album.
stinky
Yeah.
bitch. Um,
That has some
and
amazing guitar and
and
bass and
if you don't
jams.
know the songs, that title alone gives you an example of kind of how goofy all the lyrical content was. And it was an afterthought. It was all just sort of, what would go on here? Well, let's rap on this one about how I'm cool and funky.
Yeah. See, I wasn't aware of all this. So
Yeah.
as a fan all these years in preparation, I was actually going to ask about your vocals from Meanwhile and then Fold A to B,
Yeah.
that, one was more rap and then one, has more soul and way stronger vocals and more singing. And I was going to ask what accounts for that massive growth in those 5 years to your vocals. And it turns out that it's actually a completely different person. So,
Well, so between Meanwhile and Full Day to Be, we released a small run of an EP called Who's That? It's not streamable or anything. There might be some stuff on YouTube. We're going to fix that. I think eventually. I'm not in a rush to get it out there per se, because there's even a difference you could probably recognize between that and Full Day to Be. And that was the first stuff with me, or Who's That EP, where I was influenced. It was I think a perfect crossover. It's a real good median between the vocals on Meanwhile and Full Day to Be. A little bit goofier than most of the content on Full Day to Be. I was a new vocalist as well too. Like, I'm going to try to do this thing, see what I can do and have fun with it. And by Full Day to Be, it was like, all right, we're going to get a bit more serious. I started taking vocal lessons. We were going to start touring, all that kind of stuff. There's more gigs happening. I think you even hear a difference in my own style from that EP to that full length.
So I'm big into networking and building communities, and so I like to share for our listeners. I like to share how I know the guests, which shows like the power of networking. So
yeah, I love that.
I have a couple stories that you will not you know nothing about these stories, so I'm excited to share with you. But way back in the day when I was a teenager, I did a road trip from Ottawa to Toronto for Canadian Music Week. And I waited in line for hours at a Future Shop to get autographs from you and your band. So there is a picture. I have a picture somewhere of me, super not aged to drink yet for sure. And I'm there with you guys, and I got a picture and some autographs. So that's the very start of the Salads. That was around when Get Loose and the Roth Kung Fu were big hits. It's around that period of time. And then we fast forward a few years. I'm in Montreal for a Radiohead concert. So there's 60,000 people to see one band. Like, it's not a festival. It's crazy. And I was there with a bunch of friends, and we were going from bar to bar, getting a few drinks. And at one point I just look outside and I go to my friends. I'm like, is that the Salads? And I ran outside, and you guys were there. And I think I talked to Chuck more than anyone else. And I wouldn't expect anyone to remember this because I barely remember it. And and it was the Salads. And you guys weren't there for Radiohead. You guys were actually on tour. And Chuck and I
stopped us to say hello.
Yeah, Chuck and I were trying to figure out recently, what tour or what show. And he talked about Montreal had a good ska scene, and you were probably playing this venue or with this band or whatever. So those are kind of two early Salads memories for me. And what ties us here today is I reached out to Chuck a few months ago and asked him to be a guest on the podcast. And he, it's crazy. He's now the bass player for I Mother Earth. So he came on and we talked, and then that made me go through the whole discography again. And then I remember they had this awesome singer that, had great vocals and a ton of energy live and infectious and all these things. And then it turns out that we were already friends on Facebook, but you got 5,000 friends on Facebook and you can point them out in a crowd, but we've never talked before. So I thought I would reach out to you as a fan of your music and your work and see if this is something you might be interested in. So,
hey, well,
we get here today.
It's so crazy. So thank you for telling me those stories. That's amazing. I love hearing all that stuff. Again, because if I've not heard it before, it's fantastic. Even if I have, it's a good refresher of the memory. Sometimes I forget stories, and I love opportunities like this. And strange how the world works, but not too long ago, I was just thinking about how it's been a while since I've done a really in-depth kind of an interview such as this, and a little bit longer, to really capture this kind of stuff. And just historically, I love that sort of thing. And help. And I find the more we tell these stories and our memory is jogged of certain times, the more we're going to remember them just by telling them. That less chance of them being lost in space and whatnot. And that's unfortunate for everybody. But yeah, no, that's crazy. I remember that Future Stop thing because that was a big deal. There were a lot of other Canadian bands there.
Yeah, so there was, I've gone
pretty
through
nutty.
this a few times because I had Chuck on, so I shared the story,
It was
and
like
then
naked, and
then I had the Mudmen on who were there, so I shared the story with the Mudmen.
So I'm going to interrupt you and do
Go
a
ahead.
little bit of a jump bridge gap thing there, because we toured with the Mudmen and know those guys. That's how I originally met Lonnie Knapp, who was playing guitar for them. He is one of the three guys in the Reverbists, and also plays guitar in the Power of Huey as well now too. But he's been long gone from the Mudmen.
You just reminded me that you were kind enough to submit a quote that I read to them on the Mudmen episode. I forgot about that. It's funny how fast we forget things. You know?
What did I forget what I asked you to ask them, but I would have, if I had really dug into it.
So you had said
them.
Yeah, no, you had just said, some kind words, and then thank you for the introduction to him, because you're now in a few bands together.
Yes. Of course. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. Fun guys, funny guys. Lonnie always would crack up a room and just be a funny guy to be around, and has grown to be an incredible talent. And I'm proud to be in the Reverbists with him. Just that's a really fun project. But Montreal, man, we played in Montreal a number of times. I think it's often with a lot of Stomp Records bands, because again, the ska, like Chuck had mentioned, ska stuff is and the scene is really strong in Montreal, is and was. And Fishbone, we played with them there a lot. Cafe Campus, number of places. I always loved playing Montreal. Just yeah, great scene, great people, and that love of ska was a bit stronger there. So not that we were a ska band, but the influence was obvious. Yeah.
Man, the more we talk, it's like all these dots that are connecting, and it's like I don't even want to touch on the questions I have, because we can just weave through these narratives. So on what you just talked about, so I was in the GTA for 11 years. During the pandemic, I sold my home and I moved back to my hometown of Ottawa. So I'm in Ottawa now. And what that means is, if ever bands, big bands are touring Canada, they usually skip Ottawa and I go to Montreal to see them. So I have tickets. I'm going to Montreal to see Dream Theater, which is going to be
crazy.
So the first live show I'm going to see after 2 years is Dream Theater. Like my mind's going to explode or something. The musicianship, it's like you forget that humans that are capable crazy. Of doing that. And then I had tickets for last year to see Megadeth, and they rescheduled during the pandemic. They just announced the date. So now I have a date in Montreal with Megadeth, and it's a huge card with Hatebreed, with Trivium.
Fun.
It's huge. So I'll be going to Montreal. And then you just talked about Fishbone, and we've been talking about Red Hot Chili Peppers. So back in the day, there's basically one time when I was about 14 that my dad and I were not getting along, and he when he realized that things weren't going well, his way to make amends, this is what he did. This is a good dad. He got tickets for us to road trip from Ottawa to New York, somewhere in New York State. And it was to see Fishbone. This is my dad. Like, I don't know how my dad knows this stuff. Fishbone opening for Stone Temple Pilots, opening for Red Hot Chili Peppers. So it was just, him and I weren't getting along. And it's him and I in a car having to work this out on a road trip. And he set it up that we were camping during that. So we had set up a tent together and it's raining and it's just us and we're talking. And then we got our brains melted with the rock radiation from those three bands. And
Man.
the Stone Temple Pilots were super loud. And then in the changeover between them and the Chili Peppers, you see a new set of like speakers dropping down, and my dad's going, "Oh my God, it's about to get louder." And anyways, we figured everything out, and that was and you know, everything's been good since then. And that's kind of a moment that sticks out, and it ties the Fishbone with the Chili Peppers. So
do you recall seeing Fishbone for that
I
show?
do.
Did you catch it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't know a single song. I just knew that there were these legends of funk and ska, and they were amazing. And I was, I guess, a SDP and a Chili Peppers fan at that point.
Yeah, totally. I saw the Toronto date of that same tour because I vividly remember that, and just being brothers of the Fishbone guys and so tight with them. That was a big tour for them too. It was a big roller coaster for them, to be honest. As you mentioned, most people knew, I think, that Fishbone are like the godfathers from these guys. I mean, the godfathers in the sense that they're older. They're the same age bracket and same age group, and grew up in the same scene in LA as the Chili Peppers, but they were competing against each other, and Fishbone always kind of just had the upper hand. But popularity wise and success wise, obviously the Chili Peppers had the upper hand. So then thankfully could take them on tour instead of just pushing them aside and being like, "Meh, meh." But Fishbone fought their balls off every night of that tour. I felt so bad. I didn't know the guys at the time just yet at that show, but I felt so bad for them because I rushed there to get to the Molson Amphitheater to see Fishbone play before STP and Chili Peppers went on. And people were still coming in and filling in the seats. There was next to nobody in that theater, in the massive amphitheater. And Angelo got off the stage and was climbing over people's shoulders into the crowd, their lead singer, and right in their faces. And there's video footage that, if you know him personally, I mean, you can see it. Even not knowing him, you see it a little bit. He had a little bit of fuck you in his tone that day. While it was just like, "We are Fishbone" is always the presentation on stage, there was a bit of "We are motherfucking Fishbone, and you better pay attention today. I'm in your motherfucking face." Like it was that kind of energy that I could tell from Angelo. He was a little bit on the angry side.
Did that add to the show to make it better, or did it take away from it?
I suppose that's to one's own perception.
Yeah.
It added to it for me. It did make me a tiny bit uncomfortable. But again, I think it's because at some points, but again, I think it's partially due to knowing them so deeply and having some really close, being so fortunate to have some really close moments, writing songs together, backstage together. You know, when we first toured with Fishbone for a few weeks across Canada, I had this one moment with Angelo. I want to say it was in Hamilton, but I'm not 100% sure. Where we just got off stage. They're about to go on stage. He and I are the only two in the bathroom downstairs changing, and he's just kind of not having a good day. And he's like, "Man, I don't know how long I can keep doing this shit." And for me to hear one of my heroes say that to me, that was just making my world right at that time on that tour, I was just heartbroken and like, what can I say to make him not do that without seeing like I'm begging or whatever, and not understanding the position he's coming from and the history he's already laid down while we're still fresh at it. But I was just like, "Man, I hear what you're saying, but if there's anything I can possibly say as a massive fan and friend, like, holy cow, please keep going. Please don't stop." And look at where we are now today. That was 2002, 20 years later. And they're still going hella strong, way stronger than the Salads, and whew, just and still flying under the radar as far as how the history. I've said it, I've said it a couple times before because I don't like saying it often, but I strongly feel like it's going to take either Angelo or Norwood being gone from this world for people to really be like, oh, Fishbone, because those are the two guys that are the real OGs of the band. Mind you, the entire band right now that's performing is entirely the original band, which wasn't the case for when we toured with them and for a few decades. But
you feel they're super underappreciated.
Oh, man. Number one,
so
most unappreciated
for our listeners, if there was just one Fishbone album that they should listen to, do you have a recommendation as hard as a fan if you like?
Yeah, because there's no one record. Just go to the greatest hits. There's a greatest hits that I think Columbia Records put out because they've got the majority of their catalog called Fishbone 101. It's a double CD. First CD is like a greatest hits. The second CD is a lot of B-sides and other stuff that's just all crazy. That's a good example. It's a good start.